The work of archaeologists never really ends. Every archaeologist knows that incredible finds were made long before they ever picked up a shovel, and plenty more are still out there, buried and waiting to be found. Some of those finds stay hidden for centuries before finally coming to light. And when they do, they can totally change the way we see the past. In this video, you're about to see 15 ancient finds that were hidden for centuries until they were finally discovered. So, let's begin with number 15. Petrolona Man. Some skulls don't just sit in a museum case. They sit there like a threat. And that's the feeling surrounding Petrolona Man, the ancient human skull found in a cave near Petrolona in Greece back in 1959. For decades, scientists have argued over what exactly it represents. And the reason is simple. It doesn't fit comfortably into the standard version of human origins. The skull has been dated by some researchers to around 700,000 years old, though others have tried to drag that number much lower. If the older estimate is right, then it places a highly significant early human presence in Europe far deeper in time than many people are used to discussing. And that's actually where the discomfort begins. The fossil doesn't seem to line up neatly with the familiar Out of Africa story, as it's often casually told to the public. That doesn't mean it destroys the broader theory, but it does make the picture messier. And messier is the one thing textbook summaries hate. Whether Petrolona Man represents a side branch, a regional population, or something more foundational, the skull has never stopped being inconvenient. Number 14. The ancient Austrian bacon discovery. There's something oddly satisfying about finding proof that ancient people were not nearly as joyless as books make them sound. A good example came from Austria, where archaeologists studying around 6,000 pig bones found evidence that people were preparing and preserving cured pork there roughly 3,000 years ago. In plain English, they were making something very close to bacon long before many historians thought that habit had taken hold in Europe. The bones, found near the lakeside settlement of Hallstatt, showed signs that the pigs had been castrated, butchered with skill, and likely cured or dried in caves. Now that's not random meat processing. That's the method. That's a preference. That's somebody caring enough about flavor and preservation to do it properly. It also suggests a level of food culture that people often deny prehistoric societies for no good reason. The Romans later had their own love affair with cured pork, but discoveries like this hint they may not have been inventing the taste so much as inheriting it. Number 13. The Yarm Viking Helmet. Most Viking helmets people picture are wild. I mean horns, armor, and the usual costume shop crimes against history. Which is partly why the Yarm helmet matters so much. It's real, it's rare, and when experts re-examined it in 2020, it turned out to be even more important than people already thought. The helmet was first discovered near Yarm in Stockton-on-Tees back in the 1950s, and even then it stood out because almost no complete Viking helmets have ever survived. But newer analysis suggested it likely dates to the 10th century, not the 11th, and may be Anglo-Scandinavian in style rather than purely Scandinavian. That sounds like a small distinction until you realize what it implies. This was probably not the possession of some raider fresh off a ship, but of a Viking who had already become part of life in Britain. That changes the feel of it. It stops being just a war object and starts feeling more like evidence of settlement, adaptation, and identity. Also, someone deliberately buried it, which means it mattered enough to hide. Number 12. The Gwenel Lioness. You won't believe it, but this tiny sculpture from ancient Mesopotamia somehow carries the weight of an entire worldview in the palm of a hand. So carved around 5,000 years ago, the figure blends human and animal features, creating something that feels neither fully symbolic nor fully literal. It looks like a creature imagined by a culture deeply interested in power, transformation, and what happens when the line between man and beast starts to blur. Scholars believe it likely came from the Elamite world, and its style fits with a period when the people of Mesopotamia were already doing astonishing things, building cities, shaping systems of writing, and engineering societies far more sophisticated than many people casually realize. The sculpture itself stands only a few inches tall and is made of limestone, hardly a luxurious material. Yet in 2007 it sold for $57 million, which feels absurd until you look at it. Then it just feels inevitable. Number 11. The Bolivian Shaman's Ayahuasca Bag. Some archaeological finds feel almost too personal, like you've stumbled into someone's private ritual and arrived about 1,000 years too late. That's the feeling around the small leather bag found in 2019 inside a rock shelter in the Bolivian Andes. On its own, the pouch already looked weird. But once archaeologists examined what was inside, the thing turned into a direct line back to ancient altered states of consciousness. The bag contained plant remains and ritual tools linked to the preparation of ayahuasca-like psychoactive mixtures, along with snuffing tablets, llama bone spatulas, a woven headband, and even a smaller pouch stitched from 3 fox snouts. In other words, this wasn't some random traveler's junk drawer. It almost certainly belonged to a shaman, and someone who used hallucinogenic substances as part of spiritual or ceremonial practice. The strangest part is that it was left behind. Everything about the kit suggests value, effort, and purpose, which leaves one quiet question hanging over the entire discovery. What happened in that shelter that made its owner walk away without ever coming back? Number 10. The Damaidi Rock Carvings. Some mysteries don't need to be hidden underground to stay unresolved. The Damaidi rock carvings in China's Ningxia region have been sitting out in the open for ages, and they're still making scholars uncomfortable. Scattered across the cliffs near Beishan Mountain are thousands of prehistoric carvings, many of them simple images or symbols. But a significant number have attracted attention for a much bigger reason. They appear to resemble very early Chinese characters. That's where things get touchy. Some researchers studying the site argued that more than 2,000 of the carvings may be between 7,000 and 8,000 years old, which would place them dramatically earlier than the traditionally accepted beginnings of Chinese writing. That's not a minor correction. That's the kind of claim that makes entire historical timelines start sweating. Naturally, not everyone accepts it. And to be fair, resemblance is not the same thing as proof. If they really do represent a proto-writing system, then one of the oldest stories ever told about written language may have started much earlier than anyone was prepared to hear. Number 9. The 2039 Nazi coin. There are fake artifacts. There are strange artifacts. And then there's this ridiculous little menace, which is a coin allegedly found in Spain in 2018 that somehow manages to sound stupid and unsettling at the same time. At first glance, it already looks wrong. It carries a swastika, some German text, and a date stamped onto it that should not exist. 2039. That detail alone was enough to send conspiracy-minded people into a full-body sprint toward nonsense. The coin was reportedly discovered at a construction site in Avalaise, and the inscription roughly translates to something like, "New Germany, all in one nation." Naturally, that opened the floodgates to every possible theory involving time travel, hidden Nazi futures, secret regimes, and people who really need hobbies. The more grounded explanation is obvious. It's probably a forgery. But even then, the object remains weird in a very annoying way. Why create something this specific, then apparently leave it behind for someone random to find? It probably isn't proof of visitors from the future. Number 8. The Scotch Corner Roman Settlement. Roman Britain tends to get pictured in a very tidy way. Roads, forts, baths, a little order imposed on a muddy island. Then a site like Scotch Corner turns up and reminds everyone that the empire was messier, richer, and often much further ahead of the accepted timeline than historians prefer to admit. During roadworks connected to the A1 in England, archaeologists found the remains of a substantial Roman settlement in North Yorkshire, and what came out of the ground was far from provincial leftovers. The site produced amber figurines, copper mirrors, glazed tableware, artisan drinking vessels, and in the remains of around 40 Roman buildings, all suggesting wealth, refinement, and confidence. More importantly, the settlement appears to date to the mid-1st century, which pushes Roman activity in northern England earlier than many people had assumed. That forces a rethink of how quickly Roman infrastructure and high-status life spread into the region. These weren't soldiers clinging to the frontier. These were people living well. Number 7. The Govan Stones. The Govan Stones are the kind of treasure that makes you wonder how people ever walked past them without stopping in complete silence. Housed inside Govan Old Parish Church in Glasgow, these carved medieval stones are among the most remarkable surviving relics from the old kingdom of Strathclyde, yet for years they never got the kind of attention they deserved. And there are 31 stones in the collection, most dating from between the 9th and 11th centuries, and no two really feel the same. Some are beautifully carved crosses, others are more puzzling, especially the famous hogback stones, shaped like the curved backs of wild boars. One is even believed to be a stone sarcophagus, long tied by legend to King Constantine, though hard proof for that remains slippery. What makes the collection even better is that it still isn't finished, surprising people. In 2019, a 14-year-old school student helped identify additional carved stones in the area that may belong to the same tradition, which is honestly fantastic and unbelievable. Number 6. Matthew Tomlinson's diary. History has a habit of pretending compassion is a modern invention, and then every so often a forgotten voice from the past shows up and ruins that smug little illusion. That's what happened when scholars revisited the 1810 diary of Matthew, a Yorkshire farmer whose writings had already been studied for completely different reasons. Historians had mostly valued the diary for its observations on Luddite unrest, local politics, and the daily mechanics of early 19th century English life. But buried among those entries was something far more striking: Tomlinson's surprisingly humane view on same-sex attraction. At a time when homosexuality in England could still be punished by death, he argued that it was a natural part of human behavior and should not be criminalized at all. Well, that's not just unusual for the period. It's morally braver than a lot of people living centuries later still manage to be. He wasn't writing from personal self-interest either. He was reacting to the arrest of a respected local surgeon. Now, let's move to number 5, the Kilwa coin found in Australia. Every now and then, one object shows up in the wrong place and quietly starts insulting everything people thought they knew. That's the energy surrounding the Kilwa coin discovered on one of the Wessel Islands off northern Australia. The coin appears to come from Kilwa, a powerful trading center on the East African coast in what is now Tanzania, and it was minted sometime before the 15th century. That alone is strange enough. But finding it in Australia opens a much bigger question. How exactly did it get there? The prevailing theory is that the coin may have been carried east by the Portuguese after the looting of Kilwa in 1505, and later brought into waters close to Australia. If that happened, then Europeans may have reached this part of the continent centuries earlier than some traditional narratives prefer. Of course, one coin is not enough to rewrite every chapter on its own, but it is enough to make the old story feel a little too neat. And history gets very nervous whenever something starts looking too neat. Number 4. The Snowmass Mammoth Site. The Snowmass Mammoth Site in Colorado sounds simple at first. An ancient mammoth, some old bones, and maybe a few routine Ice Age clues. Then archaeologists noticed the rocks, and suddenly the whole thing became a problem. In 2012, scientists examining the remains of a mammoth found in what had once been an ancient lake at Ziegler Reservoir realized that large, smooth, soccer ball-sized stones had been placed around, it above and below the skeleton in a way that didn't look natural at all or match the surrounding geology, which suggests they were brought there deliberately. That would be interesting on its own, but it gets far stranger once the date enters the conversation. The site appears to be around 40,000 years old. That's deeply inconvenient, because accepted models usually place the earliest human arrival in North America at around 14,000 years ago. Some researchers think the stones may have been used to store or preserve meat, while faint marks on the bones may point to butchery. What do you say? Number 3. The Cross and Blackwell Victorian Jar. Cash. Most factory waste disappears quietly into history. Victorian Britain naturally found a way to make even its trash weirdly fascinating. In 2017, construction workers building part of London's Crossrail project near Tottenham Court Road stumbled across an enormous buried stash of old pickle jars, jam pots, and food containers from the 19th century. And not just a few, more than 13,000 of them. The entire collection had been crammed into a huge old cistern, once used to power the steam engines of a nearby factory belonging to Cross and Blackwell, a food company that operated there before shutting the site in 1921. Many of the containers were still sealed, with their original contents trapped inside like little Victorian time capsules. Among them were marmalade, jam, piccalilli, and even mushroom ketchup, which sounds like a punishment rather than a condiment but was apparently quite popular back then. The whole discovery is oddly charming. Number 2. Chinese skeletons in Roman London. Roman Britain already had enough layers to deal with before two skeletons quietly complicated the whole picture. During excavations in Southwark, archaeologists studying an ancient Roman cemetery made a discovery that didn't just surprise them. It widened the map of the ancient world. Scientific analysis suggested that two individuals buried there were of Chinese ancestry, one dating to the 2nd century and the other to the 4th. That matters more than it sounds. Historians have long known that the Roman Empire and China were linked through trade routes like the Silk Road. But trade is one thing, and actual human presence is another. Before this, finds of East Asian ancestry within Roman territory were rare and usually treated as isolated anomalies. And these burials make that explanation harder to lean on. They hint at something much more human than trade statistics: movement, travel, migration, and maybe even settlement. Somewhere along the line, people crossed more than just borders and deserts. They crossed entire assumptions. And somehow, two graves in London ended up carrying that truth all the way into the present. Number 1. The snake embryo in amber. There are fossils, and then there are discoveries so absurdly delicate they feel almost unfair. That's the case with the snake embryo found in amber in Myanmar in 2018. It wasn't just old. It was trapped in a lump of tree resin that hardened more than 105 million years ago, preserving a tiny unborn snake in a way science had never seen before. It was an actual embryo. That alone made it extraordinary. But the fossil did more than just look impressive under a microscope. It gave researchers one of the clearest windows yet into what early snakes were doing during the Mesozoic era. Before this, ancient snake evolution had been pieced together from frustratingly limited remains. This changed the mood. The embryo and surrounding material suggest the mother lived in a forest environment, not some barren prehistoric wasteland, which matters because it broadens where and how we imagine early snakes surviving. Well, that's all from us. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and like and subscribe. We'll catch you later.